everyone. Welcome to the 431st episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have so much to talk about. We are going to be first talking about my experience with some Roku gear. We're also going to be talking about Jamie Siminoff's new company and what the heck's happening now that Latch has acquired Honest Day's work. We've got some mild civil disobedience on the AI front, plus tons of stories about sensing. Y'all know I love sensing. We got sensing for Parkinson's, sensing for seizures. We've got a new computer designed just for sensing, and we've got a whole startup dedicated to sensing. We're also going to hear from our sponsor, Blink. And our guest this week is Alex Capocilantro, who is the CEO of Josh.ai. He is on to talk about adding generative AI and large language models to the Josh voice service. He's going to give us some best practices. He's going to talk about how they did it. It's actually a really good interview for anyone who's thinking, oh, what should I do with ChatGPT in the smart home? All of this and more await you. But first, a message from one of our sponsors. This week's sponsor is Particle. Do you have an idea for a connected product? Apply for a Particle development board and build your prototype on Particle's platform at no cost. Plus, you can benefit from up to 100,000 data operations per month and support for up to 100 devices. Get started today by going to iotpodcast.com/prototype. That's iotpodcast.com/prototype. Okay, Kevin, let's talk about Roku.
I was just going to say, I know what we're not going to talk about.
What are we not going to talk about?
Amazon Prime Day/week.
We are not talking about that.
No, because it's all everybody's talking about this week, which kind of is annoying because there was no super big stories, I think, this week on our front.
Yeah, the smart home is pretty quiet. But look, I know y'all love gadgets. And you know what? Y'all know how to Google. Y'all know how to look on Amazon. Just go find yourself some deals. No.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm not carrying that water. It's not that good of a deal. Okay, moving right along. So we're not talking about that. What we are going to talk about is, these are actually an exclusive at Walmart, Roku devices. So back in October, Roku launched some smart home devices. And then they recently, and I don't remember, a couple months ago, launched a monitored security product and a monitored security system. So Roku rebadges Wyze branded hardware. That's the first thing you need to know about this. But your Wyze gear does not work with your Roku smart home app, and your Roku gear is not going to work with the Wyze app. So that's first up. I talked to Roku, and the reason they did the Wyze gear, it sounds like, is because they wanted to put it in Walmart. They wanted to have a good price point for consumers, and they may one day develop their own hardware, but for now, they needed to get into Walmart quickly. So that's where that's at. That
is not surprising because although you can buy Roku-equipped televisions and Roku gear at many, many places, it is like front and center at Walmart. It's like right there in your face on practically every TV that they have in Walmart.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay.
Oh, you don't go. When I get out of the house, which isn't often in my little village of Harleysville, we go to the local Walmart.
Oh, okay. Well, good for you. Our Walmart is closer to me than our Target, so I should be going to our Walmart. I don't actually go to either place really often. I guess it's been a while since I've moved. Okay, so let's talk about the gear. It is rebranded Wyze gear, and it all works as you would expect, like Wyze gear. The security system is $99.99, and that comes with 2 entry sensors, 2 motion sensors, a keypad, and a monitoring base station, basically. So in that monitoring base station has battery backup. It can either be plugged directly into Ethernet, but it also has Wi-Fi. And you also have to have a subscription to, well, you don't have to, but if you actually wanted to do any monitoring, you need a subscription. So if you need that, that's great.
It's fairly basic.
It is. And you can do self-monitoring for free. Then you also have the option of security cameras. So I have that system, and then I have an indoor camera. Those go for about $27. They have the pan cam that you can swivel around to see more things. That's about $40. They have an outdoor battery-powered cam for about $75, and that has its own base station and a slot for an SD card. and I've got that running. And from a battery perspective, it's rechargeable. So it's about 8% each week, but it is summer here. So it's hot.
That's interesting that they have a base station for the outdoor camera, because I have a little base station for the Wyze outdoor cameras, but the monitoring system itself comes with a base station. So like, are they not using the same proprietary?
They're not using the same. No, they are not. You need two base stations. Yeah. So I've got two base stations, but only one. The outdoor camera one, that does need to be plugged in via Ethernet, it looks like. They also have a video doorbell, both wired and wire-free. Yay. And those have their own little not alarms. What are they called? Sirens, like doorbell chime things that you plug in. They have light strips. They have a light bulb. I have the light bulb. They have indoor plugs. They have outdoor plugs. And I have the outdoor plug that I've been testing. And the outdoor plug has 2 outlets.
Is it working any better or any different than Wyze gear, out of curiosity?
No. So this is who this is for. The only difference is I can watch my Roku camera feeds on my television because I have a Roku streaming box. So if you have a Roku streaming box that's pretty modern, or a Roku television, this is for you. I mean, other people could buy this, but really but what is the point?
Right. I mean, you might as well just get Wyze gear if you don't have the Roku stuff.
Yeah. So the point here is that you would buy all of this because you're like, hey, what is everybody talking about with this smart home? Or maybe you're like, yeah, I wouldn't mind knowing a little bit more about I have my motion sensor set outside so I can track when my dog goes in and out in the middle of the night. Just because I'm curious. I'm like, does my dog go out? Do I need to leave my bedroom door open? Because is my dog actually using that to go out in the middle of the night? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. But now I know. And if I wanted to, I could set up a camera and get video images. Instead, I set up the camera in my backyard so I could get video images of raccoon. And they're great. The raccoons, the neighbor's dog, me, and the Roku monitoring does do a couple things I like. One, it's a pretty basic system. I can't set up motion detection zones or anything on this outdoor camera, but it will tell me if it's a person, a pet, a vehicle. So that's nice. It also, when I look at a video, it will say, hey, do you want to send this to Roku to help make our service better? And I can choose yes or no.
Just like Wyze.
Yeah, it's just like Wyze, but I do like the fact that they're being a little bit nice about asking me, right? Each time.
I suspect it's actually being sent to Wyze.
I suspect you're right. Yes. Because this feels kind of like not a quick and dirty smart home thing, but it definitely feels like a quick thing. Like, oh, we need to get into the smart home. And the reason why is because they want the subscription revenue. Making TVs is a low margin business. We had Yanko a couple weeks ago talk about this. But this is all about the camera subscription, which they have, and then the home monitoring subscription that they have.
Do you recall the price of the subscription? I'm just curious because I know Wyze has obviously subscriptions as well.
I do. So they have a camera subscription that per month is $3.99 per camera for 1 to 2 cameras, or $40 a year, and a Camera Plus subscription, which is $9.99 a month for all cameras, and $99.99 for all year. So that is the camera subscription. And then with the Roku Pro monitoring, which is your security one, that's done by Noonlight, which does everybody's, and that is a $9.99 a month, or $99.99 a year. So, everybody's moving to subscriptions. With the cameras, if you're just doing self-monitoring, you're going to get the chance to view your triggered events for up to 14 days. You can remotely arm and disarm things, and you get push notifications for your alarm events. You don't get the person, package, vehicle, or pet detection on the camera or event filtering unless you have a subscription. Also, if you don't have a subscription, there is a 5-minute delay between your events.
Oof. Not something I would look for in a security system.
Yeah, they really want you to pay for it.
Well, sure.
And you only get your images without a subscription. You don't get your cloud recording for clips. So basically, you really need a subscription. That's what they're after. There is the SD card slot on these, but I don't know if you can use it. I guess I'll ask. this will all be in a review that I'm going to put out this week.
I know in the Wise camera base station, there's an SD card slot that you can save all of your outdoor recordings to. I don't know about the home monitoring base station, if that has an SD card slot or not.
That does not. No, it's the camera that has the SD card slot.
Got it.
And so, yeah, and the benefit here, again, is you get to see it on your TV. Now, about the gear. Y'all know it's Wise gear, right? There's a pretty big delay. There's nothing like super innovative from a feature or customization. This is very basic. This actually feels a lot like the smart home gear I set up in like 2014 or even as far back as 2013. Not the cameras, but, this is not
cutting edge.
But, honestly, even the cutting edge stuff, you're like, oh, is it really worth that? Just so I can like finely tune my motion detection? Maybe for your doorbell, but...
No, from an advanced features perspective, I agree. But some of the basic features, like you had shown me like the latency, for example.
Yeah, the latency on the sensors is like 15 seconds before I get a push notification. But if I set up some rules to trigger some things, so the trigger event on the sensors is it's between 3 and 5 seconds, usually. 3 is really cutting it. So it's kind of slow.
I mean, compared to what we've seen develop over the past several years in the industry, yes, it is. But again, the target audience is your Walmart shopper who is probably not with a smart home already.
Yeah, this is a mainstream user. You're going to buy this stuff and be like, yeah, let's see if I can do this. And you know what? You can.
And it'll almost seem magical to have things happen via automations, even if it takes 3-4 seconds, because they don't have the experience of any automation.
Yeah. And the automations I set up to test things are not the automation. Like, I don't have my door and window sensors on actual door and windows. I have them set up on things like drawers or just here to test them opening and closing. So, I have mine set up for a light bulb to change colors when I open the sensor. And I'm doing that because it's an easy way to visualize latency. It's just a little bit more controlled. So it is kind of fun, though. I had my motion sensor set up to show people when I was recording or on a call because people can't tell in my house. And it's summertime and my kid's home. So now I have my light bulb just turn blue when I'm recording. The downside is if I'm on a recording or I'm on a Zoom call, the light goes blue and then I am bathed in blue light. Okay, so that's the Roku experience. I'll have more on that and subscriptions and all in the newsletter this week. So, yay. So last week we talked about Latch because that deal closed. Latch purchased. Latch is a publicly traded company that did software for access control in apartments. And the company bought a startup called Honest Days Work that was created by Jamie Siminoff, who is the founder of Ring, which was bought by Amazon. Ooh, so many words. Anyway, so way back in May when the deal was announced, we were like, oh, this is like a $20 million acqui-hire to get Jamie Siminoff to run this company. It was also a vehicle to get Jamie Siminoff, a publicly traded company, to work with for his startup. So now that the deal is done, this week, Latch laid off about 60% of its workforce. They say it's 59%. Sure. They laid off their entire executive team pretty much. And Jamie is not coming on as CEO just yet, but he will soon. And basically what's happening is they're prepping Latch, the publicly traded company vehicle. They're setting it up to run Honest Days Work, or the concept behind it. And the concept behind it is actually very similar to Adam Newman, the formerly WeWork guy, his startup. It's basically providing high-end services to people who live in apartment complexes, like dog walkers, housekeeping, all of it, like tradespeople, giving them access to your apartment and helping you find those people via their app, which is called Honest Days Work. So,
yeah, they cleaned house.
Yeah, they really did. And they basically took out everybody except for some of the finance departments, and all of that's going to turn into Jamie's crew. And then coming up is Latch needs to restate their financial earnings because I don't know if y'all remember this, but when I reported on the deal, Latch was in a lot of trouble. They went public via a SPAC deal, and their financials have not been in good shape. They're not GAAP compliant, basically, and haven't been for actually almost a year before the deal was done. So they're just, yeah. So
I would not want to be the new CFO. That's all I would say.
Well, I guess David Lillis, who will become the new SVP of Finance. is in a bad spot. What'll likely happen is when the company in August, they basically have to get with the programmer. The SEC is going to be like, yeah, or you're going to be delisted. I imagine they'll end up being delisted. So, yay, SPACs. All right. That's what happened with Latch. Let's talk about civil disobedience. Yay!
This is interesting to me because I understand people are not fans of self-driving cars, but to go this far to stop them literally in their tracks, to me is a bit much. I mean, I don't think you're going to change the world by doing this, but that's what people are trying to do.
They are. There's bunches of videos on TikTok about folks in San Francisco placing orange traffic cones on top of Cruise and Waymo vehicles. You pop a traffic cone on their hood and they're like, uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Yeah, because it's literally like a giant obstacle to the camera that's on top of the roof, so it doesn't know what to do.
Obviously, the folks at Waymo are not excited. The folks at San Francisco, like as part of like the municipal transportation agency, are like, we're not really keen on this, and we don't really want this to happen because we don't need any more disabled vehicles on the streets. But it's happening because people feel like these vehicles are messing with. There's been surveys that show how it messes with the public transportation network because these vehicles get in front of buses and delay them, or light rail and delay them. There's people who live in homes around there where the vehicles are inexplicably drawn to them and they just come in and like turn around on their street. And people are basically like, you have outsourced our city streets to what is a giant test community for these vehicles, and we don't have a lot of say in it. And they don't like it. And so this is how they're saying that.
Yeah. It's just interesting to use the sensor technology against the very expensive R&D project here, using something as inexpensive as a cone.
And we see this. We see things like there are people who will wear shirts you can buy T-shirts that will foil facial recognition or image recognition cameras because they have patterns on them that confuse the camera, for lack of a better word. To me, this is kind of, if you read any science fiction, there's a long tradition of humans hacking autonomous systems by just tweaking some things, right? Figuring out the weak points and then adjusting to it. And that's what this is. And I'm team human on this one, I think.
Look, I'm not saying we should just go full speed ahead here and hit the accelerator, as it were, with driverless vehicles. But, let's do something. Like, if this gets people in the room to discuss things, with the city residents, okay, then I'm fine with it. I just don't know that it will.
I think it will. I think these sorts of actions, especially when they're well publicized and people are like, yeah.
True.
So that's all about confusing sensors. Let's talk about some really cool ways that sensors could help us. I wish we should just have like a sensor section. And it would probably be creatively named, like the sensor section. Anyway, last week, the BBC is reporting that the UK Dementia Research Institute team at Cardiff University is basically using data from smartwatches, and they can detect Parkinson's. They can detect people wearing these smartwatches if they will go on to develop Parkinson's within the next 7 years. This was published in Nature, so this is actually a reasonable, presumably peer-reviewed story. What I thought was neat about this, one, was, hey, cool that you could detect Parkinson's ahead of time. But also, they pulled this data on the smartwatch population from something called the UK Biobank. It is an in-depth health database of more than 500,000 people. And people basically donate their data to this thing, and then researchers can use it. I'm like, sweet.
That reminds me of like I have multiple invitations on my Apple Watch to share my data with these types of research projects. And if it's something that, like if I'm already using a sensor to track my heartbeat or whatever, it's like no cost to me, and I don't mind donating the data, so to speak. So I actually have opted into several of these things. And although I see why they would use a smartwatch for this, because they're saying, they can detect early symptoms such as like little shakes, slow movement, stiff muscles, which all makes sense on a wearable. I don't know if Android can do this, but on the Apple phones, it gives me gait analysis to see if I'm using one side of my body more than the other than I walk. It detects how often my foot is hitting the ground, how many milliseconds it is on the ground. And that type of data can also be used for this type of prediction, so to speak. So it's not just smartwatches that can do this, but I think this is really cool that they're doing this. And I love that people in the UK have donated their data, as you were pointing out.
Yeah, and this is peer reviewed. This is independent researchers. This is not Apple doing this.
It's legit.
So it feels a little more legit. So that's cool, right? Predicting Parkinson's up to 7 years in advance using this data. And they said they could only use it like a week's worth of data was enough to like detect it. So cool. Other sensors. This is a prototype. And by prototype, I mean real young. This is researchers at No Biological and Sandia National Labs. Basically, they figured out a way to build hardware to detect seizures up to 20 minutes ahead of the seizure. Dogs actually exist that can detect seizures by sniffing their people. They can detect it up to an hour ahead of a seizure. And I had a friend who had a seizure detection dog, and it was pretty cool. Like the dog would indicate an alert on them, and they would then have time to either take their medication or, in a pinch, sit down and get into a protective position. Like you don't want to just fall and have a seizure. You want to get down. You want to get in a safe space to do it.
Right.
So this is obviously early research, but what they're measuring is VOCs in the air that a person who has a seizure releases. And right now, the test device is the size of like a small book. So it's not a wearable, but they're hoping to one day create a wearable using this. And right now you have to swipe a person's skin. Then you have to put the like gauze on the device. The device heats up. It releases the VOCs from the gauze, and then it channels that into a chip.
It's a manual process now, and it's a large object. Give them a couple of years. They'll certainly shrink it down and hopefully find a way to automate all this.
Yeah. And I think that's doable, right? Because
Yeah.
And this is very cool because we're finding more and more biomarkers for things like obviously seizures, but with things like cancer, and having some sort of electronics that can do this is obviously awesome.
If they could shrink it down to the size of a sensor that fits into a traditional smartwatch, I mean, you're already touching the skin. I mean, I know we've got galvanic skin sensors in some watches, and maybe there's a way they can leverage that.
Even if you could shrink it to like a patch or something, like, I mean, if you have epilepsy, you would wear this daily. So it doesn't even have to be like, it could be a dedicated device that's a little bit ugly. I mean, ideally it would not be, but you know, it's possible.
Yeah. No, that would be a good middle ground to get there. Yes.
So other sensors, a company called Pano AI, they just raised more money. They raised 17 million this week, and Pano it's very trendy because it is using remote cameras with vision detection to detect fires. These are crazy expensive, but these cameras live out in remote areas. They have connectivity, and they're basically an AI. Well, it's just an algorithm that's looking for smoke and fire. And if it finds it, it sends an alert. And these cameras are like $50,000 a camera to license. But there are still people, I think, who actually go to fire towers and stay there and look for fires in remote mountains. We have them in Washington. I live on the Olympic Peninsula or next to the Olympic Peninsula. And there are people both in the Olympics and the Cascades that they hike up to these towers basically during the summer and look for smoke. And this is that.
$50,000. Yeah, that sounds like a lot. But when you think about the cost of the destruction, it's far more than that, tremendously more. So if you can get early detection, it's well worth the investment.
Yeah. And they use cellular to connect. And they have a deal with T-Mobile, and so they use their connectivity. But then sometimes they also will, if there's a cell phone tower, they'll like pop their camera on the T-Mobile cell phone tower. So, yay! This is a big deal. Okay, let's talk about
Smart dust.
Smart dust. It's not really smart dust, but Nodal. We had them on the podcast recently, talking about they do a distributed Bluetooth network, kind of like Tile or Apple Find My network, but they do it for commercial customers, and it's decentralized, and there's a blockchain component that pays people to incentivize people to create nodal hotspots to operate the Bluetooth network. Anyway, they're launching a new device. When? I don't know. But they're calling it the Nodal N1 or Nanocomputer 1. And This is a battery-powered, Bluetooth-based, tiny sensor and small compute that you can just stick places. And it will sense temperature, humidity, and light, and acceleration. And so it's basically a sensor that has a ARM M0 computer on it and a Bluetooth radio, and it runs off of a little PV, like a solar cell, and they print those, so it's real cheap to make.
I mean, it does have a battery, and even that is like printed using some kind of special zinc technology. The battery should last for about 5 weeks, they say. It is rechargeable. And when we say small, I mean, not in terms of the size, but just in terms of compute and such. I mean, this only has 32 kilobytes of onboard memory.
Yeah. And it's not huge. I mean, what'd you say it was? About
If you took a dollar bill, it's about half the size of a dollar bill, maybe 2/3. They do plan on continuing to shrink it down and all that. And since it's printable technology, I would imagine they'll be able to do that. But so when I said smart dust, I mean, smart dust would be like microscopic sensors that you could spread around the world, basically. And they, nobody would see them, but we're not there. And that's probably actually a good thing.
Yeah, we don't know about the environmental costs of microelectronics. I mean, we got microplastics. No. All right. This is cool. I don't know when it's going to be out, but we'll keep an eye on it because having something like this that you can cheaply and easily use to like track pallets or equipment or really anything is going to be useful. This gets into that concept of massive IoT. Okay. Startup news. Also a sensor. This time it's a sensor platform. A Singaporean company called Nami has announced a 10.5 million Series A. They have a deal with Origin, which is a company we've covered in the past. They do Wi-Fi sensing. So they sense movement in an environment based on disruptions in the Wi-Fi signals. So Nami is building a sensor platform. It includes technology from, they've got to deal with an electric utility to look at electric data or electricity data. They've got this deal with Origin. So I think it's really interesting because they're basically building a platform for detecting presence, motion, and other information. And it's just grabbing this data, running any inference, and then trying to maybe combine it to get new insights or just deliver the insight itself. So pretty sweet. And it's all based on software stuff. So they're not doing any of the sensors themselves. They're going to pull in the data from the actual sensors that are provided by other people and run the algorithms on it. So sweet. All right. That concludes this segment of the podcast. But now it's time for the Internet of Things podcast hotline, the segment of the show where we hear from you, our listeners. The IoT podcast hotline is brought to you by Akenza. Create amazing IoT solutions with the Akenza low-code IoT platform, including an extensive library of device payload decoders, LoRaWAN connectivity as a service, a dashboard composer, and more. You can try it for free today at akenza.io. That's AKENZA.io. Okay, we are now into July, and our July prize will be a SwitchBot bot. That's right. We talk about this all the time, and I just y'all have fun with buttons and stuff. So this is going to be a combo with 2 SwitchBot bots. That's the button pressing SwitchBot, and the Hub 2, which is its Matter compliant hub to control the bots. So this is a device that can manually turn on a flick a light switch if you need it to, or I don't know if it'll press your coffee button to start, but it's basically a button pressing robot, and it seems like fun. So let's see what y'all do with it. So if you would like to be entered to win the SwitchBot Hub 2 and bot combo, give us a call at 512-623-7424, and you'll be entered to win. And we may even answer your question. Okay, Kevin, this week's question is from Zach. Let's hear it.
Hi, this is Zach from Northern Virginia. I was interested in getting the Aqara presence sensor, but they're continuously out of stock. I found similar Zigbee millimeter wave presence detectors on Alibaba, but I'm not sure what the security implication of that is. So my question is, can you trust hardware from sources like AliExpress if they have offline modes like Zigbee and Z-Wave? Or should I still be wary of those or add other security features as well? Thanks. Bye.
Well, good news. We just checked. The Aquara Presence Sensor, the FP2, is now back in stock. I don't know if it will be out of stock by the time you hear this, but hopefully it's back in stock, so you can get one. The difference here is this millimeter wave sensor is a little bit faster than the cheaper and earlier first generation versions. So a lot of the cheaper ones, and there is even, I think, an Aquara one, they take about 6 or 7 seconds of latency for the millimeter wave sensing to be like, oh, this disruption is a person. Now I will turn on the lights. The Aquara FP2 is it's faster. It's about, I was getting even 1 second. I don't know if it's really milliseconds, which is kind of what you want, but it's much faster. So that's what you would be looking for there.
Yeah, I'd probably stay away from most of the comparable or seemingly comparable products on AliExpress or some of these other massive sales platforms, just because it's so hard to find information on the security of, the systems themselves, the products themselves. I've seen people buy things and they're told it works with this, or they're told this is the product you're going to get. They don't even get that product. I personally would just not go there. That's just me.
Yeah. And you mentioned talking about offline modes and Zigbee and Z-Wave. Those are not sensing modalities like the millimeter wave sensing. That is a radio protocol that sends the data. So the Aquara sensor actually it will work with the Aquara Z-Wave hub, but it's sending data back to the cloud over Wi-Fi. And I will tell you, I have a Firewalla device plugged in, so I can see what data my devices are sending and how often and where it's going. The Aquara does send data a lot. It sends not a lot of data, but it is connecting pretty regularly, every 15 minutes or so, back to a cloud that is in China. So
it's not uncommon, unfortunately. It's
Aquara is a Chinese vendor. So that is what I can tell you is happening. It's not behaving any differently than other devices. I don't see it. I mean, if it's suspect and behaving badly, it has been doing so since the beginning, and it has not been flagged by my Firewalla. So that's what I can tell you about that. We'll also say that, hey, if you're concerned, a device like the Firewalla will share all that information with you, and then maybe you'd feel more comfortable. But those are a little bit more expensive, but so fun, so useful.
So much data.
Yeah, it is a lot of data. Okay, so hopefully, Zach, that helps you out. Go check out your sensor, and if you want, and see, hopefully it'll be in stock, and have fun playing with it. It is a lot of fun. All right, if you would like to be entered to win the SwitchBot Hub 2 plus 2 bots, and you have a question for us, give us a call at 512-623-7424, and you will be entered to win, and we might even answer your question in the show. That concludes this segment of the show, but please stay tuned for our guest, Alex Capo-Cilantro, who is the CEO of Josh.ai. We're going to be talking about adding ChatGPT-like capabilities to smart home systems. He's going to talk about what he learned, best practices, and much more. But first, a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Blink. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. And this week's sponsor is Blink. Blink is a low-code IoT software platform with a unique mobile app builder. And today's guest is Irina Leshuk, who is the Chief Commercial Officer at Blink. Hello, Irina. Could you just tell us a little bit more about Blink?
Thanks for having me, Stacy. So Blink enables businesses to launch IoT software solutions in just a few weeks and without even having to have any software expertise. So our typical customer produces electronics goods, anything from air conditioners to vertical farms to street cleaning devices, EV chargers, you name it. And today's reality is that these devices are expected to be connected, and they're expected to have an app or some sort of digital interface. And these companies have two options. They can hire a bunch of engineers spends a few years building their own solution with web dashboards, cloud, mobile apps for customers, and then maintain all of this. Or they can just sign up for Blink and get all of the software out of the box and start selling their products as soon as possible.
Excellent. So Blink takes care of all of their IoT software needs. And what about the hardware?
Great question. So Blink is a hardware agnostic platform, which means the company selects a chip based on their needs and budget, and then just uses our libraries or API to connect it to Blink. So they're not locked in with any specific hardware vendor, and they can even switch if their needs change further down the road.
And what would you say is the most valuable functionality that Blink provides?
Well, so our customers say that we cover 90 to 100% of all of their IoT use cases, which is a whole lot of functionality. But if I were to highlight a few, it's definitely our no-code mobile app builder. It allows you to publish branded native iOS and Android apps in literally 2 weeks. I'd also call out device provisioning. We offer an industry-leading device commissioning flow. It is super easy and super user-friendly on the outside and packed with complex functionality under the hood. But really, user management, over-the-air updates, automations, notifications, rule engine, it is all there.
Excellent. So what's next? Any new features that you're working on?
A very timely question. We just launched Blink Blueprints. So Blueprint is basically a pre-built device template. So it comes with ready firmware code and pre-configured mobile app and web dashboards. You just copy the blueprint, follow the guide to set up hardware, and you've got a working connected device with its own app, really in minutes. It's just another step forward in our mission of making IoT software development really simple.
Awesome. So where should our listeners go to learn more about Blink and Blueprints?
Just go to blink.io, that is blynk.io. Try the platform for free or get in touch with us.
Excellent. That's Blink, blynk.io. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Alex Capocilantro, who is the co-founder and CEO of Josh.ai. Hello, Alex. How are you today?
Hey, Stacey. Doing great. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, you were last on the show 3 years ago, so it's been a minute. Josh.ai is a voice assistant. It's installed by professional installers. Y'all have microphones. Do y'all have control screens? What do you have? I'll ask you.
Yeah, so we started the company about 7 years ago, and we're really a smart home platform that tries to simplify the interface across the board. We do our own voice control with our own voice processing. We build our own hardware, but we're also a full-fledged control system. So we have processors, we have a beautiful app, we have a Josh remote. There's a lot that goes into it, and not everyone uses everything. Some people just use the voice or they just use the app, but we really want to try to provide a comprehensive overview of options when you want to use the home.
Got it. And the voice, I have always been impressed with what y'all have done with voice. It's very good. And just at the end of June, y'all announced something pretty cool, which was y'all have created Josh.GPT, which is bringing a large language model to the capabilities that y'all already have in the smart home. And my first question would be, wow, that was super fast. How did y'all do it? And why did you decide to do it?
Thank you. Definitely a lot of hard work and a lot of late nights. Let me give a little bit of context just so people understand kind of why we moved in this direction. When we started the company, we were right before the launch of Alexa. When we came out, there was no clear idea that people wanted to speak to their homes. And in fact, when we started telling people about the idea that you can walk into your home and say, turn on the lights, open the shades, and play some music, that idea initially sounded crazy because people were used to voice control in their cars. They didn't work all that well. Early Siri didn't work all that well. And so there wasn't really this idea that people thought they wanted to speak to their homes. But we believe that homes are getting more complicated. There are more devices. It's hard to remember, how do I adjust the music? How do I go into Netflix? How do I, open my shades or whatever it happens to be? And so we decided to focus on building a really, really good voice assistant for controlling the home. And so that meant there are literally millions of ways to say to turn on the kitchen lights, adding, lots of adjectives, changing the word, adding scheduling. So, some examples would be turn on the kitchen lights, turn the kitchen lights on, make the lights in the kitchen go on, power on the kitchen lights. I mean, there's so many different ways. And then, people add lots of little disclaimers like, could you please turn the lights on in the kitchen right now? All of those things we built into a language model so that if you're talking about the kitchen lights or the thermostat or the TV or any device in the home, we were able to handle it really well. One of the problems, though, is it's hard to go really wide and answer everything in an accurate way. And so we looked at Alexa and Google and Siri. They were trying to answer any question under the sun. And so that meant that they had a very wide set of capabilities, but they didn't always get the lights to turn on, or they didn't always, make the device control the right way. So we spent a long time building just robust integrations, a large relatively to what we were doing language model for interacting with the home, lots of different aliases, lots of learning. And we also had to build a knowledge graph because one of the things that's really tough about voice control in the home is people speak in very abstract ways. So an example would be, you can say, turn on X, turn on the lights, which would be the lights, turn on the kitchen, which probably means the lights in the kitchen, but you're referring to a room, but also turn on the Beatles, that would be music, turn on Mad Men, that would be a TV show, turn on the news, probably the television, but it could be, a podcast or a radio channel. And so we built out a knowledge graph that is able to basically figure out what is the probability that you're asking for a device, a TV show, a piece of music content. And all of that was going on as people were getting more and more frustrated with voice assistants, because what we keep hearing is their privacy concerns, their accuracy concerns. You want to make sure that when you give a command, it does the right thing. And so we decided that we wanted to go deep instead of wide. And in doing so, we really focused on the luxury smart home, professional installers, making sure that we worked in an environment that was really reliable. As we were doing this, we were realizing that we were getting further and further away from being this sort of all-knowing, omni-intelligent, system. And we weren't sure how we were going to solve this, but we knew it was important. So over the years, we've ingested all of Wikipedia's data so we can answer, what's the capital of France or what's the population of India. There's a lot that we can get out of Wikipedia, but it's definitely finite. And then we looked at doing some integrations with Wolfram Alpha. They have a great model that's able to do some really interesting things. Like you could say, how many calories are there in 19 Skittles? And it'll give you an answer because Wolfram Alpha is great with numbers and computation. But we still realized that building our own really intelligent system was not likely to be something we did in-house. We've known the OpenAI guys for a while. They actually got started around the same time that we got started. And we had been following some of the early versions of ChatGPT. We didn't really connect the dots on the opportunity with what we were doing until basically November, when everyone started hearing about ChatGPT. And at that point, the idea of being able to ask really for anything, not just on the generative side, but any fact, any piece of historical data, a recipe, you ask, what actors are in this movie, it started to present a really exciting opportunity. We basically went in and we said, ChatGPT and OpenAI is one example of a large language model, but there are others. Anthropic is doing some great stuff. You've got, Microsoft, what they're doing. You've got, Meta with Llama. There are quite a few systems that are coming out. And so we started creating basically a concept in the Josh language model that says, depending on what question comes in, we want to basically direct that question to different endpoints where ChatGPT is one of those endpoints today, but that can possibly evolve over time. And so just to kind of give a concrete example, you say, what's the weather? We directly hit our weather API. We give you back the weather response. We've been doing that for years. On the same token, you say, watch the newest season of Black Mirror. We figure out that Black Mirror is on Netflix. We turn on the TV. We switch the input. We go right to the TV show. We do that inside of the Josh algorithms and the Josh server that we've had for a while. But then if you say, tell me about the history of the show Black Mirror and who created it, well, we figure out now very quickly, we don't know that answer, but we have high confidence that ChatGPT would. We redirect that over to ChatGPT in an anonymous way because we do want to make sure we preserve privacy. We get back that response, and then we give that, and we try to do all of that in less than about 500 milliseconds, which is part of the challenge. So we've definitely been able to move forward partly because we've already been creating the system that's able to try to figure out where to redirect answers over the last 7 years. And then what the guys at OpenAI have been doing, creating a really good API, making it super easy to integrate, and just the relationships that we've had, that's allowed us to move pretty darn quick.
Y'all did this really quickly. When did you make the decision, and how did you know it was the right time to throw this out for your paying customers? This isn't a free product.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And honestly, it was one of the harder things about launching because we know that these systems aren't perfect. You're going to get, these hallucinations that we all hear about where the data might not be entirely accurate. Or one of the bigger issues is when we launched this, ChatGPT only had data up until November of 2021. And so telling a customer, you can ask who won the United States presidential election 5-10 years ago, but you can ask who won the Super Bowl this year. That's not an easy thing for a customer to really wrap their head around. And we decided that we believed that OpenAI with ChatGPT was moving quickly. We believed that our customers would get more value out of what we could do as opposed to what we couldn't do. And we believed that there would be some understanding if there were some issues. That being said, we also decided we don't want to just subject people to this if they don't want it. So we launched this as an opt-in service. When you open up the Josh app interface, we have a pop-up that says, Josh GPT is now available. Would you like to opt in? If you opt in, here are some of the caveats. Here's basically how it's working. And it's totally your choice whether you want to do it or not. And so we wanted to make sure that people understood some of the drawbacks. Interestingly, though, very shortly after we migrated to GPT-4, and that is a lot more reliable, a lot faster, and the hallucinations are much fewer. The other thing is, without really making it too public, ChatGPT has been adding more real-time data, and it's surprising. Like, one of the questions I threw at it was I said, how many iPhones have been sold? And it grabbed me the number based on Apple's latest public filing. And so some of the things that we were worried about when we launched just a couple weeks ago have already been solved. And so for us, we knew that we were taking a little bit of a risk moving fast, but we thought it was important. And we also wanted to get out there before Amazon, Google, Apple, or any of the other companies tried their hand. We just wanted to be first, and we wanted to start to really pave the way on how do we carve this out in a way that's useful for customers and start getting real feedback on how they like to use it.
Let's talk about that. So when I saw the presentation and you're like, I'm really into art, so I'm asking ChatGPT about, or I'm asking Josh about, the history of certain artists. And I was like, that is not something I'd think to ask my home or my digital assistant. So what are the use cases that you think people will use this for? And then how are customers actually using it since it's actually been a few weeks?
Yeah. One of my sort of philosophies with the business is I stopped guessing at what people were going to do a long time ago. I really like to build based on data and feedback. And so we went out to our professional installers and said, this was probably 3 months ago, who would like to beta test this upcoming feature? We let them know a little bit of the caveats and just said, you need to have Josh in your own home. This is not for a customer system. This is internal testing. You might get really bad information, but we need some beta testers. And we had over 600 of our installers sign up to beta test in the first couple weeks. So we started rolling out groups of about 30 beta testers at a time. And we simply said, ask it whatever you want, use it in whatever way you'd like. But at the end of about a week of testing, we want to know what was most useful, what was missing, what would you like that it couldn't do. The things that came back were surprising. Some people are huge sports fans and they use it for sports trivia. They want to know when a certain athlete was, first joining a team or when the team last won, the World Series or whatever it happens to be. Quite a few cooking questions come up where people ask about how long should I cook something for? What's the best temperature to bake something at? I need a recipe for something and I'm missing an ingredient. What do you recommend? I got inspired based on one of our dealers' requests was my yogurt in the fridge often is a little bit watery, which I can't stand. So I just asked Josh GPT, where's the best place in the fridge to keep my yogurt coldest? And it gave me a great answer that I moved my yogurts to and the problem was solved. So we're finding that it's very, very varied. People are using it for health-related questions, which I always am a little bit cautious because this isn't medical advice. but they're usually pretty generic. They're not, diagnosing cancer. It's more, I have a bad sunburn. What would be a good, ointment to do? Or what should I do about, my foot's been hurting? We're seeing some really interesting, I guess I'll call it like tutoring and education related questions. And I think these are parents with children wanting to help them learn about, explain to me, why did this country invade that country? Or why was this thing done this way? Which can be really interesting questions. So I'm just finding an idea pops in my head or in our customers' heads, and it can be anything under the sun. I'm constantly getting surprised by how people are using it.
Let's talk about best practices. You've mentioned a couple things already, like telling your customers, like, hey, we may not be great at this when they opt in. So what are some other best practices for other companies who are like, yeah, I do want to bring this kind of level of, say, unpredictability into my product or home?
Yeah, so there are two things that we think about. The first thing is we really are trying to set the lowest possible expectations we can. And when the experience is over delivering, it ends up being a delight. Part of what we're finding, which is really surprising, you and I and many of the listeners actually live a little bit in a tech bubble. The fact that we even know about ChatGPT, we're amazed. I think the last poll I saw suggested about half of the US population are still not even aware that ChatGPT is a thing. And so when we released this, we thought, oh, everyone has used ChatGPT and everyone knows about it. And this just gives you a hands-free voice ability to get at those answers. Not the case. The number of people who are writing in saying, I had no idea that technology could do this, that has been pretty amazing. And so I think the first thing is it's important to remember not everyone is as up to speed on technology as you, me, and most of our listeners. And then the other thing is we like to really lead based on data. And so when we went out and did our beta testing, we wanted to make sure that we were going to be accurate at least 9 out of every 10 times, at least 90% of the questions that came in. And we found, or we basically set a rule, if we get 500 beta commands that come in and we have bad responses to more than 50 of those, so more than 10%, we're not going to release this. That's too high an error rate. And it turned out the error rate was much, much lower. It was more like 2%. And the errors that came in were fairly understandable errors. And so for us, we felt like we had confidence that the experience would be very good for the majority of people before we ever thought about going live to our customers.
That's very smart and kind of surprising. I mean, we only hear about the bad things, so I guess it makes sense that it would not be messing up as often as we really think it is. Let's talk about privacy, because with these sort of digital assistants in the home, we've obviously been burned by, one, they might hear a wake word and wake up and record things that we're unaware of. Two, some of these utterances are being sent to real people, which people did not necessarily understand. And then three, those utterances are kept unless you manually delete them with some of the traditional platforms. How do you handle the basic privacy factors of having a voice assistant in the home listening for you? And then we'll talk about how you're handling privacy with ChatGPT.
Absolutely. Privacy is one of our core tenets. When we started the company, we thought about if we're putting microphones in people's bedrooms, bathrooms, and home offices, they need to be able to trust this. And so the first thing is we put out a very clear mission statement that says we will never use data to sell you ads or go to third parties. If the data is being used for anything, it's to enhance your experience. And that's something that you don't believe companies in the beginning, but as we've been around for more and more years, we're in more and more homes and more people are familiar with us, they're starting to really understand that we mean it, that's something that we stand behind. The next thing is we make sure that the microphones are always very clear. If they're listening, they illuminate the LEDs. There's always a physical privacy switch if you want to disconnect the microphone, and they'll not listen for more than about 15 seconds. So unlike cases where you've heard about an Alexa accidentally calling someone and that person listening in for a long time, in the Josh environment, that's just not possible. The next thing is we give people the ability to choose what frequency they want commands to automatically erase. So they can say, I want to have commands stick around forever, which allows the machine to get smarter. Or they can say, auto erase anything that's more than 30 days old, or anything that's more than a week old, anything that's more than a day old. Or they can say, I want to basically have my system in incognito mode. It should never record anything. I say turn on the lights turned on. Don't write that to a database. We give the customer full choice over how they want to do that, because at the end of the day, it's more important that they trust the system than that the system's able to get smarter. That's been a very successful path for us so far, especially if we've seen companies like Meta and Google and Amazon kind of struggle with people feeling like their voice commands are being listened to, they're being redirected to serve ads. We've done a really good job so far with how we've handled privacy. When we started thinking about introducing GPT, we initially thought, let's not share anything with OpenAI. So you give a command from Josh in your home, that goes up to the Josh cloud. Then Josh basically anonymizes that data, gives just the text over to OpenAI to get a response, and then comes back and feeds it back into the system. And what we found in our beta testing was people would ask questions like, what are some good coffee shops nearby? And by not including the location, we couldn't accurately give answers to those questions. So we started to introduce a little bit of data that we'll share, again, as anonymous as we can, but enable to give good responses. And with that, we actually started to realize there's a really cool opportunity that we can start to present to our customers. And so what we're looking at doing, and this is sort of a next phase, it's not yet live, we want to allow the customer to choose what information should be shared on each individual device. So maybe you have a microphone in the master bedroom, maybe you have a microphone in the kids' room, maybe you have a microphone in the kitchen. We want you to be able to say, the one in the kids' room should not share their name, but we would love to share the fact that it's coming from a 9-year-old boy. Because that way, when you ask to describe quantum mechanics, we know that we can have the response come back tailored for a 9-year-old boy. And so what we're looking at introducing is the way that the customer can choose what information they want to allow to go with the command that can help customize it, but they're in full control whether or not they want to provide that or not.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. As we get more capability on this front, we give up a lot by remaining completely incognito. But it is impossible to make that trade-off when you're faced with this app would like access to the following 8 pieces of data, but they don't tell you why. And it becomes hard for the consumer to be like, well, is that trade-off worth it? Should I share my health data just to get a better smoothie recommendation? Probably not. But I would totally share my health data if it helped customize my workouts, right? Okay. Thank you so much for coming on the show this week, Alex. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so thanks everyone for listening to this week's Internet of Things podcast. I really appreciate it, as does Kevin. And if you want to find out more information on the Internet of Things, you can find it at my free weekly newsletter that comes out every Friday. You can sign up for that at www.stacyoniot.com/newsletter. Or you can just visit the website for all of those stories published a little bit later. Thanks for listening and have a great week.